Thank you, and everybody who's performed and spoken tonight. Beautiful, inspiring, and this is my play, Angelfire. Let me introduce the cast. Christopher Riley is Uncle Harry. This is based on my family, the abuse in my family, but I hope there's some entertainment value as well as educational value. Next to Christopher is Patty Hunter, who read the poem Shaken Baby and is my Aunt Mart. Next to her, an old family friend, Tom Blessing. It's been a friend since, I don't know, 3rd grade, 4th grade. Next to me, the star, I guess, my mother, Dorothy Jean, Jennifer Moore. Also a great friend met her in Cherubusco, and I was making a movie about a big turtle, a giant turtle. And Bob Hunter is playing my brother Jan, and I'm playing me. Since I can't act, I'll just play me. I will start with just a quote, and then we're going to get going. My mother, Dorothy Jean, was a lovely woman when I was little. By the time I was a young man, she was a demon. There's no other way to put it, hence the title, Angelfire. But here's a quote from 1861 from Mary Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She said, "Marriage is not all a life to a man. His resources for amusement and occupation are boundless. He has the whole world for his home, his business, his politics, his club, his friendships with either sex can help to fill up the void made by an unfortunate union or separation. But to woman, as she is now educated, marriage is all and everything, her sole object in life, that for which she is taught to live, the all-engrossing subject of all her sleeping and her waking dreams." I use that quote because I think that mentality was prevalent in the 40s, 50s, and early 60s when this play is set. So with that, Angelfire, thank you.
Come on in. I don't get many visitors, and I don't get out a whole lot either. Mostly I make things, but one person who visited me pretty regularly was Dorothy Jean. She made me wish I could see. But she sure did smell good and was always so nice. I never did understand why my sister Grace talked about her in such a bad way. Dorothy talked about Grace's son. That's what she called him, Grace's son, not her husband, Grace's son. And always struck me as kinda odd, but I don't know much in the way of love and marriage. Dorothy told me I was the only one in the family who understood her. Mostly I just listened. I guess that's rare these days, to listen. I mean, pay attention, not just sit here and nod. Dorothy felt so alone, like she didn't fit in here, and told me how she's always been lonesome ever since her mom, Mabel, died. When she was just a little girl, 9 I think she was. I felt kind of sorry for her. Anyway, typhoid, that's what Grace said Mabel died of, typhoid. Drank some well water, but that's not what Dorothy told me. No, she had another story.
It was my dad. He didn't take care of my mom like he should have. She was an angel, the most beautiful woman in the world, and he treated her like dirt. Even a little girl could see that, and I wanted to help her. I cried when she got sick. She protected me from my dad and brother. I cried for 2 whole days when she died. I didn't want to live myself. My reason for living was taken from me for no reason. What did my mother do to deserve to die so young? And then when I wanted my daddy more than ever, he sent me away, but he took my brother with him. I felt so rejected and so alone, so terribly alone.
Don, her dad, he was a barber. Had a shop downtown, not sure if it was his. Might have just worked in it, couldn't have made much, I wouldn't think, and told me he just lost without Mabel, and he didn't think he had it in him to take care of 2 little kids. So he asked me if I could take Dorothy. I was kind of surprised, to tell you the truth. I mean, Mabel was my sister, and so in that way, I guess it made sense. But I was an old maid. That's what you call if you are a certain age and not married, and it wasn't meant as a compliment. And I didn't know much about raising a little girl, but I finally said, yes, my niece, I couldn't say no. Don said he'd pay for her expenses, but she couldn't be raised Catholic. Well, that was just some nerve. Me being a Catholic, never missed a Mass unless I was sick. But I said, okay. She could go to church with me, but she couldn't join the church.
It was strange. I had to go live with Aunt Mart and Uncle Jim. They lived over there in the house where my mom got sick, where my mom lived until she got married. Aunt Mart wasn't married. Uncle Jim wasn't married either. Aunt Mart was strict, especially about boys. She wouldn't let me hardly even talk to a boy, let alone have dates. Said God sends girls to hell who have sex and aren't married. I guess that's why when I got older and was in high school, I married Jerry. He seemed to like me, and it was a way out of her house.
It was a dance at a high school in Logansport. I lived in Peru, 15 miles down the road, and went over there with my brother for something to do. I was attracted to her the first time I laid eyes on her. She looked like a movie star, all dressed up. A lot of the girls were wearing jeans or long pants, but not her. Skirt, nylons, heels. I worked up the nerve to strike up a conversation, and not long after, we were married. We got married in the big Catholic church in Roosevelt in June. Big wedding. Religion was a sore spot with us. Our son was born a year later.
That's about the time when I first met her. They lived here in Peru for about a year after their first baby was born. She used to talk about that, how she passed her boy off as a girl, let his hair grow, made curls, named him Terry, so it could be a girl's name. Grace told me she tried to jump out the window at the hospital when the nurse told her, "You have a healthy baby boy." After they got married, they moved to Fort Wayne. That's where he was born. And not too long after, they moved back here for about a year and then back to Fort Wayne when he got a job on the railroad.
Well, you know, Jerry made her have a baby so he'd have another deferment from fighting the Nazis. That's why he made her quit her job. And he quit his life insurance job where he was the youngest executive in the country and got a job on the railroad, being a dad and the sole provider of the family and working on a critical occupation job that kept him out of the Army. Back then, the troops and supplies were transported on the railroad. Jerry told me a couple of thousand trains a day rolled through in the Wabash and Pensy stations.
Terry said the best thing he ever did was being born and keeping me away from the Nazis. Dorothy should have understood that. She wouldn't want her husband to go off to war.
That's why he made me quit my job, the bastard.
She told me she felt trapped, that she felt she wasn't happy, that she knew she was supposed to be, being married to a good provider and being a mother of a healthy child, but she wasn't.
I know I'm supposed to be happy and that I wanted to get married, but I didn't know I'd have to quit my job and that I'd marry a man who made me have a boy when I wanted a girl so bad. And I loved that job. For the first time, I felt free. I lost my mom and was raised by an old maid aunt who wrapped herself around the black robes of the Catholic Church. She took care of me, and for that I am grateful. But seems like she didn't want me to have a life of my own. No boyfriends or even dating. I was lonely, to tell you the truth.
Did it get better when your aunt got married?
It did. She wasn't as strict. Of course, I was older then and had my job at the telephone company. I was an operator.
Where'd you live when she got married?
Just a couple blocks away and about a block from the house we lived in when my mom and dad were married. There was only one bedroom, but they converted the attic into a bedroom, so I had my own room and privacy.
Is that when you got your job at the telephone company?
I loved that job. It was the first job I was on my own, with my own money and a place to go that wasn't dictated by someone else. I was good at it, too. And I liked the girls I worked with. I thought when I got married, we'd live in Logansport. He could be an insurance exec there, just as well as he could in Peru, and I'd keep working, at least for a while. Living with Jerry turned out to be like living with Aunt Mart. I was living someone else's life who was telling me what to do.
Only now with kids.
Yeah. All I wanted was to get married and have a pretty little girl or two. I thought if a girl wanted a girl, she'd get a girl. If she wanted a boy, she'd get a boy. And if she didn't care one way or another, God would decide.
So you were disappointed, I imagine, when you found that not to be true.
Shocked and mad out of my mind. I'm laying there with a kid I didn't want, thinking about a job I did want, and how both the kid and the job were for him, not for me. And I just wanted to jump out the window.
He made you quit it because you were pregnant.
Yeah, so he could get out of fighting the Nazis. I wish to hell he'd had to fight and got his damn head blown off.
I knew there was a reason I never got married.
Everyone told me I should be happy, and if I'm not, there's something wrong with me. But you know, eventually I quit fighting it and tried my best to enjoy it. I quit dressing him up like a girl. There came a time when you couldn't fool anyone. He was looking like a boy. And I started to realize I loved him, even if he was a boy.
She was the best mom. We walked hand in hand to the barber shop.
I took him to get his first haircut, chopped off all those curls, broke my heart.
And downtown, we lived close to downtown. We could walk there, and she'd take me to cowboy movies at the Wayne Theater. It's not there anymore. Downtown was great back then. We'd go to Walgreens on the corner and have lunch on the second floor. It was right on the corner, and you looked down on all the people walking on the sidewalk, the buses with those wires attached to cables. And it was like a giant painting with moving figures or a movie.
I loved going downtown. I'd get all dressed up and we'd go see a movie, one he wanted to see. I didn't mind. I liked being dressed up, the way people looked at me.
We took the train out to Arizona, Tucson, when I was maybe 4 years old. I hadn't started school yet to see her dad, and I remember the palm trees at the train station and Grandpa Don buying me a pocket knife with a picture of a mountain on it at the department store, and how his new wife Reba and their daughter Karen, and how my mom wanted to like her but didn't. She was jealous, I think. The other thing I remember was these soldiers coming over to talk to us on the train, and one of them gave me a bullet. Looking bad, they used me to get away to talk to my mother.
Karen never lost her mother and never got shipped away to live with an old maid aunt. So I lost my dad and my mother, and she didn't lose either.
My mom was at her best when I was sick or sad. My first day at kindergarten, she walked me hand in hand to St. Paul's Lutheran School just a block away. And when she left to go back home, I started to cry. I had never been apart from her before. Teachers came out to comfort me. But when they weren't looking, I ran around and back and hid behind a telephone pole. A class was out having recess, and someone spotted me and told on me, and the school called my mom, and she came and got me and hugged me. She was like that when I had polio, too, a few years later.
So you like being a mom, and that's why you had a second child?
I don't know. I guess. Well, not exactly. I was so mixed up. I guess I thought my next child would be a girl. No, I don't guess. I was sure she would be a girl. And I thought a boy and a girl, that's okay. But when that baby turned out to be another damn boy, I was through. I wanted no part of it or him. I refused to hold him. I refused to name him.
My dad named me, either after a friend or after a famous band leader. My dad was a talented musician on the trombone in high school. So good he would have gotten a music scholarship to college, but he hurt his lip and couldn't play anymore. That's why he resented his sons going to college. He wanted us to go, but still was resentful that we got to do what he didn't. And on top of that, he had to pay for us to go. He didn't have the money back then in the Depression. My brother Terry says resentment is the American disease. Both my parents were smeared with resentment.
Well, I did the best I could. I know Dorothy blames me for a lot of what's wrong in her life. And what she doesn't blame me for, she blames her husband. I was a single woman when she came to live with me. I was living at that time with my bachelor brother, Jim, who worked on the Pensy R Railroad, kind of like a janitor. He cleaned up around the yard and the shop. Did that ever since I knew him. He was born in that house and he'll die in that house. Don't get me started on Millie. She's his housekeeper. She's related to the Hinkles, the man whose famous field house was named after. That's about all I know about her. Anyways, it was probably a strange environment for a little girl who had just lost her mother to step into. I made sure she had clean clothes and food to eat, and she grew up a Christian. I worked at a department store downtown when she came to live with me. I was a sales clerk, worked there a long time, and I was still working there when she got married and had Terry. I remember she came to see me when he was a baby, and he was in a stroller, and she got too close to the stairs, and somehow the stroller slipped out of her hands and went tumbling down the steps. So everyone just held their breath, afraid to look. But somehow it ended right side up and he was fine.
She sure did want a girl. I never really understood why. She said it was so she could dress her up and make her look pretty. But why was that so important to her? If I had to guess, I'd say maybe she felt guilty, that it was her fault somehow that her mom got sick, and maybe she didn't love her enough. And though a daughter of her own, and through a daughter of her own, she could atone, find redemption, and forgive herself. Maybe that's why there after a while she got so mad at her husband and the kids she made with him. Thanks to him, she'd never get a chance at redemption.
I got to where I really loved little Terry. He was a sweet little boy, didn't fuss and really smart. And then Jan came along, and that was a disappointment, I admit. But I managed to adjust after some time passed and loved him too. I was still young, like 26. I had lots of time to make a girl. I grew up wanting a house full, but I got more realistic as time went on. Just one. I'll settle for one. Surely my next one will be a girl. That's what I kept telling myself. But still, as time went on, I began to feel a sinking despair. What if I don't have a girl? It's not fun giving birth. They had to cut Terry out of me. He was coming out ass backward, feet first.
Even then, I couldn't do anything right.
We moved not long after Terry got out of the hospital from polio. That was terrible. I was so scared. He was in the 3rd grade. It was in the fall. They came and put a big sign in bright red letters on our door. Quarantined. Made me feel like a criminal. But somehow Terry recovered, and not long after he got out of the hospital, Jerry came home all excited one night. "Look out here," he said. "I got something to show you." So Terry and I went out and had a look, and there, sitting in the alley, was a brand new car. "I quit the railroad," he told us. "I had to celebrate. I bought a business and this car."
I was safe. The war was over, no more drafting guys to fight the Nazis. I didn't need the railroad job no more. I bought a grocery store and then a house a few blocks away. This was better for my family. On the railroad, I was gone a lot, overnights. Now I'd be home, go to work, come home.
For me, those were great years. I went to a little school down the street from the business, Trinity it was called, all 8 grades in one little brick schoolhouse. And because there weren't many kids, I got to play all the sports, was captain of the safety patrol, got all A's, and our teacher, Ray Spray, taught all the subjects. We'd have English, Ray Spray, math, Ray Spray, and he was also the principal and the coach. After the 8th grade, it's been a constant retreat into enemy territory.
We lived there until 1956. I kept going to Trinity and set all the basketball records. On Sherman Street, I used to dribble a basketball outside the house on the sidewalk like a madman. A neighbor told me years later she'd sit on her porch and watch me, and I'd be dirty, and Mother would go leave me alone with my baby brother Rick and get all dressed up and get in a taxi and go downtown. I was 6 when Rick was born. This is when she began to lose her mind. Her brain started to unravel day by day, week by week.
Rick was born a year or so before I graduated out of the 8th grade. Oh, I was an altar boy, too. Then for 2 years, I walked to a big public high school. I was lost. I went from being a star in a little school to being a nobody in a big one. I never had a date. I had girlfriends at Trinity. And this is about the time Mother started yelling at me, calling me names. Repulsive was her favorite, shattering my confidence, my sense of self, especially my sense of whatever you call it, being a boy. Till about the 8th grade, I was sexless, but when my voice changed, I started getting hair on my face. She had to face it. I was a boy. Her love turned to hate, and I blamed myself.
It was hard on all of us. She bitched and bitched about wanting a nicer house. Looking back, she was saying, if I have to share a house with all these repulsive brats, then by God, you're going to get me a nice one. She'd get all dressed up, I mean really dolled up, and get in a cab. She never drove, and taking a bus was out of the question. She was a movie star after all, and she'd go meet a realtor to look at a house, and it was always a he would bring her back. She was a knockout in those days, she really was.
She'd probably been better off if she'd had an affair with one of them. I know we would have been. It would have given her something to think about besides how awful her family is and how God betrayed her. I know how she thought. I'd sit and listen to her tale of woe for hours. Self-pity was her middle name. I vowed I'd never fall prey to it, and it's pretty much had its way with me.
God, at Christmas he'd shower her with gifts, diamond rings, mink coats. He tried to buy her love.
He could have bought her a mansion and it wouldn't have made any difference.
Toward the end, before we moved, it was more a silent scream, a hidden rage, more neglect, no meals, never cleaned. She'd given up on the mother thing. She felt she was entitled to her rage and neglect. God tricked her, so the hell with it, was the way she thought.
When we finally moved, Dad bought a house in Indian Village with high hopes this would make her happy. It was the first housing addition in Fort Wayne, advertised nationally, on the river, stylish homes. They left out the part it was built on the site of where the poor farm was, and the poor farm had an insane asylum on it.
Probably right where our house was.
She got her nicer house, and that's when she really came to life,
She found herself,
screaming like a caged animal.
more like a rabid dog.
Get out of my sight, you repulsive brat. I wish you'd never been born. I hope you die. The sight of you makes me sick. I'm going to the adoption agency today and trading you for a girl.
She was like foaming at the mouth. Spittle came out of her mouth, her eyes blazing red with fury, ripping up all our pictures, shattering the glass frames against the wall.
Oh, if only camcorders had been invented then, the memories we could share over Christmas.
Remember how we used to go to church on Christmas Eve before we'd open our presents? In the last year or two, she'd get dressed up, if you can call it that. Her nylons would be crooked, her hair uncombed, her lipstick smeared, and she'd stagger into the church.
Dad made her go to try to dress up the charade of family togetherness on Christmas.
She made a mockery of it.
I sort of admired her for that, to tell you the truth.
At home, I'd have to call Dad at work to come home. Dad, I'd say, she's on a rampage again. I'm afraid she's going to hurt Rick.
Now she'd added drink and drugs to her repertoire. Such were the joys.
Or as Rick would say, oh, what a delight it all is. Dad just couldn't bring himself to have her committed.
I threatened her with getting her shock treatments. That would scare her, and she'd say she's sorry, and I'd believe her when she said it. Would never happen again. But it always did.
That's why Rick says she wasn't crazy. If she was crazy, she couldn't have turned on and off her emotions like a light switch. I can still hear him when he was around 5 years old. My mummy doesn't like me. She chases me around the house with a stick, and I have to eat cold soup every day.
My mother fancied herself a movie star, like Loretta Young or Judy Garland or Marilyn Monroe, each representing a part of her. Loretta, the elegant, stylish beauty, the epitome of stardom, conducting herself at all times with class, always dressed like a lady, which is why my mother almost always wore a dress and spent so much time in the bathroom. That was her throne, and downtown was her stage. And Judy and Marilyn were the tortured, misunderstood victims of male expectations.
I think she always resented Jerry for making her quit that job. Everything was for Jerry, where he wanted to live, what he wanted to do, where he wanted to work. Even the child was for him to keep him from fighting the Nazis. She got to feeling all she could do was she was good for having babies, and then in her mind he gave her boy babies on purpose.
When I got pregnant for a third time, I thought, finally, God surely will give me a girl. He can't be that cruel. There are so many women he gives girls to who don't even care if it's a girl or a boy, and all I want is one. Is that too much to ask? When he gave me another boy, I hated him, hated Jerry, hated all my rotten sons. I wanted revenge.
She wanted a girl so she could dress her up. That much I know. Make her pretty, maybe replace her mother.
I thought of putting her in an institution for a while and getting her shock treatments.
There was nothing wrong with me, the bastard. He didn't have to go through the agony of giving birth. He had his fun, and then I'm left with all the misery, and after they're born, more misery, changing their crappy diapers, making them bottles, listening to them cry, while he's off being a big shot at his business. I didn't need shock treatment. I needed a new husband, a new life.
I loved her. I really did. I didn't think it was as bad as it was.
It was a Saturday, a few days after Christmas. The sky was gray. I got off the bus I took from the Y downtown where I was playing basketball, and from the corner saw my dad racing down the street. I knew in my gut something was wrong and ran full speed to the house. In the 5 minutes it took me to get there, I saw a police car pull up. I ran in the house, and there was my baby brother in his crib in the middle of the living room floor. He was wrapped in extra blankets and diapers. And the next thing I saw was my mother being carried out on a stretcher. Her face was ashen, the color of chalk. She looked like a mummy, and I knew she was dead.
Jan called me at my friend's house and told me to get to the hospital right away and meet Dad there. Something happened to Mom. I jumped in the car and broke all laws to get to the hospital. I ran up to the emergency room, and there sat my dad, his head in his hands, and I went up and touched him on the shoulder. He looked up as if in a trance, and this giant of a man in my mind looked at me with an expression that would stop the heart of the most hardened among us. He gathered me in his arms and, sobbing, whispered, "Son, your mother's gone." And I started to cry.
At this point in our program, we will open it up for questions and answers for any of our performers or any of our speakers.
Yes.
Do you think that she was mentally ill?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I wrestled with that all my life. I've bounced from feeling guilty, depressed, rotten, worthless, to why should I feel that way, that no good be. But somewhere deep inside of me, I have sympathy for her. She was so tortured, and she had to have some kind of mental illness. I mean, for that transformation to be that stark. What I put in the play is true. I mean, I could have put a lot more, of course, but she was loving and kind, and then became, in that one passage Jennifer read so well, just that was typical, day in, day out. You know, and so abuse takes many forms. She really didn't hit us. She tried a couple times, but it was mostly the mental and emotional, constant barrage of you're worthless, I hate you, especially our manhood, our maleness, whatever. That's why I put the emphasis about the girls. You know, why she was so obsessed. We had some theories. Anybody have any theory? Anybody have anybody you know that you can relate to that wanted a girl or a boy so desperately? And she blamed everybody, me, her husband, God. She really let fly on all of them from time to time.
Terry,
Yes.
I'd like to respond to that question
Yes,
about mental
Tom,
illness
sure.
a little bit. I've had a little experience with mental illness. I imagine many of you have had some experience with people who are mentally ill or who have suffered it from yourselves. This was, Dorothy died in 1962. It's a long time ago. And back then, treatment for mental illness had not evolved very much. Going right from nothing to shock treatments is what they were considering back then, and that was fairly common. Today, there's a lot of in-between steps. There's medication that can be taken, and I don't think you'll ever know what impact that kind of treatment and a good doctor might have had on her back then. So I guess I knew Terry's mother. I was a little boy at the time, and she was flamboyant. She was a beautiful woman, and she was always friendly to me. And I guess I think back on what happened to her, and I do feel sorry for her and what she had to experience back at that time.
Yeah, but thank you, Tom. And Tom, unfortunately, has had too close of experience with mental illness, and if he wants to talk about it, I'll let him. Not for himself, but from a loved family member. Anybody else? Jennifer, what do you think reading it? You're a mother of 2 children.
I could relate.
Okay.
We all have our moments as mothers.
So you could relate. I mean, you
I
had
can
some of
relate
the-
to certain frustration, certainly.
My dad's point of view, of course, was he worked all the time. He's never home. And he wasn't out drinking. He was working. Probably some of you know him. I won't go into it, but he did work hard, and in his defense, he was making a good life for his family. But for her, and his little kids are home with her, and she's running wild, so you can look at it so many different ways. I also had anger issues with my father, but now that I'm a father, I have more sympathy for his point of view also. I don't know if there really was an answer to this, but it certainly took its toll. I regret that I went to IU when she was at her worst and had her way with Rick, my brother. We're doing a show May 3rd with Rick's songs. Rick took his life in 2000, and it was a direct result of abuse. He said he heard voices, heard her screaming at him. He fought that all his life, and in his life, though, he left beautiful art and music, and we're going to have some singers sing his songs, so I hope you'll come. That's May 3rd. There's some information on a sheet back there at CS3 at 3 o'clock. But anyway, any other questions or anything about Malaya's speech or the performers?
This is Patty Hunter. Sorry. I am bipolar. I used to hear voices. I was bipolar number 2. Type 2, I'm sorry. I'm on meds now, so I'm leading a normal life. But I understand the descent into madness. Before I found out that I was bipolar, I was in the New Age for a long time, thinking that I was a psychic and everything like that because of the voices. But I'm on medicine now. I'm out of the New Age, back to church, and I'm thankful that they have the medicine nowadays. Is still experimenting with certain type of medicines. I'm still like a guinea pig, but I am being helped, and people nowadays, they need it, just like I did. And I'm glad that I am receiving help. That I'm not afraid to admit that I am bipolar. It's what do you call it? It's an unbalanced chemical in the brain, so to speak. It's a chemical imbalance. I'm sorry, I did it backwards. A chemical imbalance. It's kind of tough for me to talk. But it's chemical imbalance of the brain is not the person's fault. It is, that's why I take medicines to balance the chemistry in my brain so I can think straight, do things, be normal.
Terry, may I say one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
You know, this is a discussion about child abuse primarily, and mental illness can be a factor in child abuse. It so happens in Fort Wayne that we have two of the most wonderful facilities that, had they been available back in 1962 or in the 1950s, might have made a huge difference. One is the Carriage House in Fort Wayne, which is one of the best psychosocial rehabilitative centers in the nation and a training center for people with severe mental illness. It's on Lake Avenue. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's an incredible facility. The other is Aaron's House for Grieving Children, which was started in the early 1990s. Many children come there and they get all kinds of help dealing with the death of a parent. And often abuse has been involved, you know, they've been involved with abuse. Many of the kids I facilitate there, and it's really something to see how they respond to that. So we have those two facilities. If you know people, if you know children that have had a death in their family and are having difficulty dealing with it, contact Aaron's House. If you know somebody that has a severe mental illness, contact the Carriage House in Fort Wayne.
How do you spell Erin House?
E-R-I-N.
E-R-I-N, okay.
Thanks, Tom. Those are good points, and you raised an interesting point. Certainly in the 60s, mental health, mental illness there was not the awareness of it. There's even more embarrassment. There's still embarrassment, but embarrassment, shame. For my dad, knowing what I know now, it was difficult for him to take my mother to an institution. Every time he tried, she would cry and say she'd be better, and that's why I had in the play, Rick said she wasn't crazy, because if she was, how could she turn that on and off? Why wouldn't she scream at him? Why, she could control it. Medicine wasn't as good then. She took her life with sleeping pills. And she got a whole bunch of them, tricked doctors, and got 2 different doctors to give her prescriptions. So I wish I knew. You know, this helps me. Thank you for coming and listening and expressing some questions and opinions, because I've lived with this all my life and I've let it dominate me. And out of this is all the things I've created, direct results. So who knows, if she had been better, how our lives would have been different. I know this, I'd have my brother Rick with me. That I know. Yes.
I would like to say thank you for expressing yourself tonight. Thank you for making others aware that it's okay to express themselves. Thank you to Malia for expressing herself. And you used a great word. The word is awareness. And so I appreciate your courage, and Malia, your courage. And the more people that can be courageous, the more awareness comes. The more awareness comes, the more treatment and healing happens. So thank you.
Thank you. That's a beautiful statement. Nobody else has any comments to end on, I think. Thank you very, very much.